Hello all, it's Dr. Ruth Dotton here. I'm a board-certified adult psychiatrist who focuses on implementing metabolic and lifestyle interventions to get at the root causes of mental illness. So today I'm going to be talking about what a ketogenic diet actually looks like in terms of macronutrient breakdown for when we're talking about ketogenic therapy. So before we get started, again, this is disclaimer that this is not medical advice. We are not entering into a doctor-patient relationship. And if you are at all considering pursuing ketogenic therapy for yourself, please discuss with your medical and/or mental health providers to see if this might be right for you. Okay, so let's get into it. As stated in an earlier video, a ketogenic diet, it is any way of eating that lowers insulin enough to turn on fat burning mode to a meaningful level. And that we measure with measuring ketones either in blood or with a breathalyzer or in urine by measuring the level of beta hydroxybutyrate. And so a level of 0.5 or higher is considered a meaningful level of ketosis. So we talked about how this can be done through fasting, extreme exercise, calorie restriction, and through the manipulation of macronutrients. Now, the last of these is the only way to sustain a state of nutritional ketosis long term while still adequately nourishing your body. So let's talk about the macronutrients effect on insulin in the body. So carbohydrates, and specifically refined carbohydrates and sugars, are going to stimulate insulin the most. And that's why these are the macronutrients and foods that we have to avoid the most on a ketogenic diet. And then next we're gonna have refined proteins in terms of things that stimulate insulin, followed by whole food protein. So a refined protein is gonna be something like a protein powder. And then the macronutrient that stimulates insulin release the least is going to be fat. And so that's why fat can be consumed liberally on a ketogenic diet. And similarly, pure fat can also be consumed during intermittent fasting to try and extend a fast. And you won't break the fast or lose the benefits of the fast because the fat is not going to be stimulating insulin. So you're still going to get all the same benefits. So people might find like fat bombs that consist of heavy cream, MCT oil, and butter to be helpful with extending those fasts. Now, the original ketogenic diet consisted of 90% fat and then only 10% protein and carbohydrates combined. So most experts agree now that this diet really does not consist of adequate protein to nourish the body. And it's also not necessarily necessary to have such a strict diet in order to maintain a therapeutic level of ketosis. So on the other side, we have of the low carb diet spectrum, we have the Atkins diet. And this is very low in carbohydrates, just like a ketogenic diet, but the protein and the fat are really unrestricted. So most practitioners today who are working with ketogenic therapy use a kind of modified Atkins diet, which recommends very low carbohydrates, but then moderate protein. So it's not unlimited, but it is enough, right? Moderate, and then liberal fat intake. And the reason that we have to limit protein intake, like we talked about before, is that protein does stimulate the insulin release. So if we have too much, it can knock you out of ketosis. So we want to have that sweet spot where we have enough, we're meeting our needs, but we're not having too much, that we're losing the benefits of ketosis. Okay, so I'm going to describe a starting macronutrient breakdown here. But keep in mind that every individual has different needs and that some may be able to tolerate more or less carbohydrate or protein on a ketogenic diet. And so please, this is something to definitely work with your practitioner to figure out what's right for you. And it may be a process of trial and error. So a ketogenic diet can also be formulated with no carbohydrates at all. So this would be like a high-fat carnivore diet. So we keep in mind that although certain body cells, so certain like brain cells and other body cells do require carbohydrates for their metabolic processes, those carbohydrates do not have to come from our diet. So it is possible to form those carbohydrates from other macronutrients like fat and protein through the process of gluconeogenesis, which means sugar new making, right? So like making new sugars. So although we absolutely need carbs for the metabolism, again, it doesn't have to come from our diet. Okay, so that being said, a starting place
for a macronutrient breakdown that you could consider would be to limit your net carbohydrates to 20 grams. And so what's a net carb? So a net carb is going to be calculated by subtracting the grams of fiber from the total carbohydrates. So for example, so like let's say a serving of broccoli has 3 grams of carbohydrates, but it also has 1.5 grams of fiber. So the net carbs for that broccoli would be 1.5 grams. So what this does is it allows for people to consume more non-starchy vegetables, nuts and seeds in their ketogenic diet, which all consume a bunch of fiber, which, as we know, is important if you are consuming carbohydrates. So now if you're on a carnivore diet and you're not consuming carbohydrates, you're also not going to be consuming fiber. But what we're finding out with more research and anecdotal experiences that the fiber is less important if you're not consuming carbs. Okay, so we then would want to calculate what someone's protein intake would be. And so we're going to calculate that moderate protein goal based on their age, their activity level, their health. Like, do they have an injury? If they have an injury, they're going to need some more protein to allow for adequate healing, etc. So now, right now, I know everyone's all about like high protein diet. People are talking about 1 gram per pound. And for some people who are not pursuing a ketogenic diet, that's great. That's awesome for them. It helps them to achieve their goals, their health and wellness goals. But it's probably not going to allow you to maintain in a state of ketosis with that high of a protein intake. So for a ketogenic diet, we're looking at a goal of 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight, or 0.55 to 0.77 grams of protein per pound of ideal body weight. Now we're talking about ideal body weight, not your actual body weight. And so how do we calculate ideal body weight? Of course, this is just like a rough estimate. Everyone is so individual and, based on your muscle mass, your frame, etc. And that's why we have like a range in there that can account for that. But the rough estimate is that for women, we give them 100 pounds for the first 5 feet and then 5 pounds for every inch after that. And then for men, we start with 106 pounds for the first 5 feet and add 6 pounds for every inch after that. So if you're a 5'5" woman, then ideal body weight would be 100 pounds for the first 5 pounds plus 5 times 5 for those 5 inches, so 125 pounds. Okay, so if someone is older, not very active, not much muscle mass, then you're gonna probably aim for the lower end of that range, of the protein range, because their needs are gonna be lower. Whereas if someone is younger, they're more active, they have a lot of muscle mass, then you're gonna aim for the higher end of that range. And of course, you can always start somewhere and just sort of adjust as you go based on ketone levels and what someone seems to need, how they're feeling. Okay, in terms of fat, we're just going to recommend eating to satiety for most people, at least in the beginning. If someone's having trouble achieving their metabolic health goals, so like maybe they're not losing as much weight as they want, maybe we need to track the fat and see how much you're actually consuming. Or maybe they want to gain weight. In that case, it's probably healthy to have a fat goal to consume. But for most people, we can just say eat to satiety and that's fine. Now it's important to keep in mind that this fat can come from either someone's diet or from their body. So if someone has a lot of body fat to burn, they don't necessarily need to consume all of that fat from their diet. So their body will actually just burn it from wherever it can find it. And this is actually surprisingly easy. So that's why you can see people on a really low calorie ketogenic diet, because when people are in a steady state of ketosis, their appetite drops significantly. And so they may be fine eating a 1,200 calorie diet and just burning the rest of the fuel from their body fat stores. Now you have to make sure that they're getting adequate nutrition in terms of their micronutrients and everything else. So this may not be sustainable for everyone, but it's possible. So this is surprising. So if someone needs to maintain or gain weight, then they're going to need to be consuming a large amount of fat. So that they're not tapping into those body fat stores. And it's also important to keep in mind that when you are in a state of ketosis, your metabolism actually increases some. So you're probably burning about like 300 to 400 more calories per day. And so your energy needs increase all the more. Okay, so to summarize, as a start to a ketogenic diet, a person can limit their net carbohydrates to 20 grams and their protein to a goal of moderate intake based on their age, ideal body weight, and activity level, and then just eat fat to satiety. Now, that being said, I do recommend tracking at least protein and net carbohydrates for the first 4 to 6 weeks, or until you're really in a steady state of ketosis. You have a sense of what's in everything and what kind of food and meals are satiating to you and still helping you to maintain a state of ketosis. Now, if you elect to stop tracking macros, it's super important that you continue to check your daily ketones. And like we said, that can either be done with a breathalyzer, blood ketone meter, or urine test strips. If you're having trouble sustaining that steady state of ketosis without tracking, then you might want to go back to tracking. And some individuals prefer to do this regardless. Okay, so I'm gonna stop talking there today. In the next video, we can talk more about like what foods are useful to incorporate in a ketogenic diet. But we'll stop there for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this video. Feel free to hit the like button or to put a question in the comments below. And I hope to see you in the next one.